Okay.
Hello. Let's move this so that works a little better for us.
Now, can I...
Whew. All right. That too. You want some more books to raise it?
Yeah.
That's easy. Or bring out the big boys, put it on a typewriter case.
Okay.
More books, or is that good?
That is good.
Cool.
All right, now how do I...
Great.
Oh, that is my phone.
What do you want?
I wanted to send people this link to the other stream.
Yes. Hello, one person who is on here. Let me see if I can get back on the internet.
Okay. We will start in about 2 minutes, everyone. I'm trying to switch streams.
The eternal conflict. Oh man, the internet crapped out. The live stream didn't work. Spooky October surprises.
Okay, all right. Now, how do I get shareable link? Okay.
Hey. Oh, your internet's working again. That's good at least.
All right, now how do I get back?
Oh. Watch that work now.
No, it's not going to work. Wait, where's the old one?
That's the old one now. Oh no. Yeah, that's the old one. There we go. Almost ready.
Okay, now I have to go to the actual...
Colin claims it's still running as well, right?
Yes, please. Okay.
All right. Well, after all of that.
Hi, everyone. It is Victor Yates with the incredible Brian Sonia-Wallace. He has graciously agreed to be the moderator for this live Q&A after my video project, Death Sentence, premiered on the City of West Hollywood's website. So Brian is the new poet laureate for the City of West Hollywood. Congratulations.
Thank you.
He also is the writer of a new book of poetry called The
Poetry of Strangers. It's a book of essays, but there are poems in it.
Oh, okay. And he also was the poet in residence at the Mall of America. So thank you again, and you can give a little spiel about.
Sure, it's my favorite thing. It's like, hey, I've come on your YouTube to talk about your project, and it's all about me. No, it's been a pleasure getting to know Victor really since quarantine. I do a project with the City of West Hollywood called Pride Poets, bringing poets to write on typewriters, and then in quarantine, on Zooms. for people through Pride Month. And so Victor was one of our poets for 2020 and had actually encountered the project in 2019 and had a poem written for him then. So thrilled to get to know his work more and deeper, and to be able to delve into a little bit of the background behind this poem and the history of it. The poem won't be part of this video, but it's Death Sentence, which it took me a while to see the pun because it's it's a dark pun, but it's there. Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit.
Yes. And before we start, I would first like to thank the City of West Hollywood for providing me with this opportunity. I received a grant through the Artful Distancing Program, and please visit weho.org/artful to see the work of the other artists. And special shout out to Rebecca and Jessica from the city for really helping me along this process, along with Mike from the city, who's always amazing. And I would also like to thank the videographer, Anthony Castro, who was able to bring my vision to life. So just thank you, Anthony. So let's start.
Tommy Lee says, we love a grant.
Oh.
So please, if you do have questions about the video, about the poem, about the grant, I'll be monitoring the chat and making sure that we see those. So we'll start off, Victor, just asking you a little bit, as people are starting to bring questions in, just about the process of writing the poem. It's a longer piece. You're obviously tackling a lot of history and a lot of different stories that you're weaving in. So I'm curious, was there a research process for it? What was that like?
So this grant, I believe it, the opportunity came about in May or June. So I think of like maybe early June, and the George Floyd incident had happened in late May. And then we learned about Breonna Taylor. And so all of their deaths, their lives were going through my head as I was writing the grant. And I wanted to create a project that honored their lives and was also a tribute to the people who are unnamed, who they have been murdered, lost their lives. And I didn't do a lot of research because every day we learn about a new death, a new story. And so all of these names were already in my head. And I, because of the grant, I was able to really write through trauma, pain, suffering of others and myself. And I wanted to create something that people could look at and also like process their own trauma, their own pain, as a way to start a healing process through art. Because for me, art is a way that I can heal and transform.
I'm curious within that conversation about the role of poetry, because I think you're probably best known as a fiction writer and a novelist. And so I think it's interesting. I know in past interviews you've talked about a poem that was inspired by, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was someone calling you faggot on the bus.
Oh, yeah.
And so this idea of poetry as this medium that, like, this is what it's good for, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is this processing. And I'm curious if you can talk about the difference for you between writing fiction and writing a poem like this.
Yeah. For me, I don't consider myself to be a poet, but my poetry, when I write it, when it comes to me, is very project based. And so it's around something that has happened to me, and I'm trying to write through it. And so typically it's a project, and it's always based off of an experience that I've had or an encounter that has left me um, trying to figure out a way to work through it. The poem that you were referencing was in an anthology, and I was in New York on the bus, and this guy got on the bus and he started screaming, um, "Burn the fags," and it just caught me off guard. And I needed, and it stayed with me for a very long time, and I needed to write to work through it and to be able to continue on with other projects. So poetry is a way for me to kind of like deal with something pressing that's urgent, and then I can just kind of like birth it into the world and just let it go and just move on.
So you say you don't consider yourself a poet. Do you remember like the first poem that you wrote, or how old were you when this started being a way that you would come to terms with reality?
Yeah, so Maya Angelou is the first poet um, that reading their work really disturbed me and left me with so many questions and made me want to be a poet. And I consumed as much of her books and writing as I could. And so because of my I know what good poetry is, and what I wrote definitely was not good poetry. And so I have the utmost respect for poets because poets have a discipline that they sleep, breathe, eat poetry. And I, it's easier for me to write sentences, where in poetry um, there's this lack of beauty that is in my work. So I just don't consider myself to be a poet, but I respect poets, which I am not.
Oh, the eternal passing of the poetic buck. But of course, the poem is sort of one part of this project, and the other part that I wanted to ask you about is the video, because I know that there was a little bit of a process with coming to this final form, which maybe you want to talk about first, because I think originally it was supposed to be a live event.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of how you initially conceived it and how it transformed into the current form?
Yeah. So the project was going to be live, that I was going to read the poem outside of the sheriff's station in West Hollywood, as a kind of like art protest piece talking about police brutality against Black bodies against a police station. But because of COVID, things changed, and so it became a digital project. And I am really happy with the product that came out of it, because with live performances, if it isn't filmed, there is a limited amount of people that can actually see it, especially with COVID. There's social distancing, and a lot of people wouldn't be able to fit in that space. And so I actually love it being in video form because it can be shared for years to come, and more people can see it. And so I'm really proud of it in its current form.
And you've got a channel for it to live on.
Yes.
Always helpful. What about the aesthetics of the video? How did you decide? I know we talked a little bit before this about kind of editing it and putting it together. How did you decide on kind of the? I already said the aesthetics. That's the best word I got for it. You know what I mean?
I wanted it to be as bare as possible, so that people could really focus on the words and the emotion. And so I had a vision of what I wanted it to be. I wanted to really express pain and trauma experienced against Black bodies. And working with the videographer Anthony Castro, we were able to work together to really bring my vision to life. And so, just kind of like the bare white background, um, and just the extreme close-ups, I was hoping that that would express um, all of the kind of like trauma, pain, fears, uh, to really get to a kind of like an artistic place where people could experience it in a way and really leave them just understanding what I wanted to do.
Mm. I'm curious within that thinking about kind of authorial intent and funding and all of those things. One of the lines in the poem you talk about was it the first time ever being called the N-word being in West Hollywood?
Yeah.
And so I imagine there's an interesting tension, right, with
Yeah.
this project. Like you said, originally the thought was to do it outside of the sheriff's station in that space. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit um, to having that muse.
Yeah. So for this particular project, I knew it was going to be painful writing it. Um, and there has been a few instances where I've been in West Hollywood and I've experienced racism, stereotyping, people not understanding why I was in a particular space. And so I wanted to include all of those things with um, other kind of like traumas and all, but also I didn't want it to be about me though, but through my life experiences, other people could really understand um, what Black people experience in North America. And so my story, I was hoping to be able to relate to other stories of Black people. And so that was really important as well. And as I was kind of like working through this and talking with friends, friends had similar experiences. And so I knew it wasn't something that only I experienced, but other Black, brown people had experienced these things in West Hollywood as well. And it writing it, reading it to other people really helped me to kind of like work through because I was still dealing with that. The incident where the owner of a club kicked me in the back, that happened maybe like 8 years ago or so.
Wow.
But I've never really gotten over it. And there was a point where I said I would never set foot in West Hollywood ever again. Um, and you can be in a space and be triggered by things that you see around you. And just writing it kind of like helped me to process those feelings and not let it sting as much anymore. Cause like I will still remember that incident, but it doesn't sting as much.
God, one of the things I hear in that answer is this idea of reclamation, like what it means to reclaim a city, what it means to reclaim, I mean, in our present moment, a country.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you have thoughts about that, about obviously writing as a step toward kind of healing and being able to approach it. And then after that approach, what next?
Yeah. Writing is very personal for me in that I always whatever it is, if it's fiction, poetry, I'm putting in part of myself as to create like a beating heart um, on the page, and I feel as if you are a person of color, if you are someone who is queer, if you add artists to that, you have to talk about social injustice that is happening in the world. You have to talk about like things that have harmed people. We have to talk about traumas because through art we're able to understand the work, like understand the just kind of like more global issues, and people can take that and kind of like slowly kind of like piece together, okay, this happened and then this also happened, and so how do I deal with that? And so art is a tool that can really create dialogue, and people can work to bring about change, and that's why um, I just love all genres of art. I could not live without art. Um, I don't know what that life would look like. And so it's just really important for people to consume art, to touch it, feel it, read it, um, process it, and then figure out what it is that the artist is trying to communicate, and then talk about it with other people.
You've talked a little bit about kind of art that influenced you. I'm curious if you have a piece or two that you feel like influenced this piece, where you're like, oh, I see these writers popping up here.
So one of my I recently went to a professional writing program, and before that I had kind of like literary mentors in my head, and Nikki Giovanni lives in my head. One of my favorite pieces of hers is titled For Sandra, and it starts off as I wanted to write a poem that rhymes, but revolution doesn't lend itself to bebopping. And it ends with, I don't think these are poetic times at all. And so her voice is constantly in my head, and her poetry is it's like alive with rhythm, but different types of rhythm. And so I kind of like I didn't necessarily want it to like write in her style, but to write with a clear message. And also, Toni Morrison is one of my idols, and Toni has a way of creating these beautiful images on the page that I try to write toward, but not copy. And so those two are people that I'm always thinking about them and their approach when I write. But there are hundreds
Of course.
of writers that I love and respect.
Oh, I'm so glad we got to hear Nikki Giovanni.
Ah!
The best when that happens. It's just a quick reminder to folks who are watching in the live stream. If you do have questions, put them in the chat, and we will do our best to answer them. So perhaps zooming out a little bit right now, how does this piece operates in a whole constellation of projects I'm sure that you're working on, and that you're sort of worlds that you're thinking about and building. Are there any of those that you can talk about, and how does this relate to them?
So I am working on a second novel at this time, and I try to think of social issues that I can highlight in my work. And so in my second novel, I want to talk about the role of women in society and what it means to be a woman in the world today. And so I think that as an artist, that it's really important to have um, serious issues in your work, and you can mix in things that are kind of like light, but you can kind of like hide things in a body of work, and they can like bubble to the surface. And then it's always amazing when people are able to pick up on those things, like, oh, like I thought you were going this way, but then I saw this and I was like, there are all of these breadcrumbs that led me to
Mm.
this point. And so thank you for highlighting this issue. And that's really important, to as a way to kind of like to ground your
Mm.
writing.
Are you looking for total personal curiosity? And then Joanna, I see your question, but I have to follow it up with this really quickly. Do you look at sort of theme and then find what story emerges, or do you tend to go to a story and then see what that broader theme that it ties into is?
I tend to go to a story and
Mm.
then see what fits into it.
I had a suspicion. We have a question from Joanna Beaverton. Thank you for asking. Um, as a person of color dealing with racial injustices, especially since in the past was always turned a blind eye to, do you feel that due to COVID, we're more awake to racial problems in the world?
I would say yes, because especially with the death of George Floyd, that was the end of May, and individuals had been in their homes for about 2 months or so. And we were glued to our TV sets, and it people were because we were able to see this image everywhere, not just on TV, but on social media, um, newspapers. And so it it was as if the image of his face and um, what happened to him was everywhere. And so because of COVID, and I'm still furloughed from work, and I know a lot of my friends are as well. And so it was really, we were forced to deal with it. And people were thinking of, what can I do to express my anger? What can I do to get rid of this trauma? Um, and my friends who are artists, we were trying to figure out, what can we do through our art to express what we feel. And that's what I was really kind of like writing toward, is kind of like what can I do to highlight um, what I was feeling after watching the devastating video of his death. And it was a really scary moment, because there are all of these unknown names were starting to become known names, and it just kind of like added to the trauma. And so I think that because of COVID, more people have like mobilized and were looking for kind of like online spaces to figure out what they could do. And so more people are writing letters to their local elected officials. More people are creating petitions online. More people are checking in with their friends and family members. I think more people are moving more into an active role in trying to create change, but change locally. And so COVID has really changed a lot of things about how we operate and how we see the world. But I think that, especially with us being in an election year, um, more people have submitted early voting ballots than in the previous election. And so we're seeing a lot of change. We're seeing people, or at least in like my own personal experience, my friends who haven't been as active in politics, they're realizing that I need to do something. And so I hope that we're able to continue that after COVID ends.
We have a great follow-up question from Mr. Funky. So of course it's a good question. Which I think is really pertinent. What has changed within the gay community with regard to black and white gay men from all the quote unquote new consciousness, or is it all performative?
Wow.
Right?
I would say that, especially with COVID, more people at home, and social media, Twitter has a way of creating dialogue through memes, and I have seen all of these interesting memes about kind of like white privilege and what it means to be queer and what it means to be privileged in the queer community. And that has created a lot of dialogue online. And I think that I can't speak for someone who is white because I'm not white, but I think that because of all of the deaths of queer people and all of the kind of like hashtags that have been created around people who are queer and in the black community, that more people are starting to not necessarily wake up, because that's kind of like a weird thing to say, but more people are realizing that I can lend my voice to this, even if it's retweeting something, and I can somewhat add to the conversation about Black deaths. I've seen that a lot amongst people that I follow on Twitter. And so it really kind of like is a personal thing, that I always see these kind of like memes or these tweets that it costs nothing to share this tweet, and so more people are tweeting about Black Lives Matter, and it's really this kind of these different groups are kind of like pushing up against each other. And so if someone realizes through social media that they haven't they that they have not discussed racism amongst their groups of friends, I think people are figuring out that I can do more with my platform on social media, and that's the most important thing, just to get people talking.
God bless social media. Thank you for that. We have a follow-up from Joanna Beaverson, who asks, as a person of color, you are already experiencing discrimination, but also being part of the LGBT community. Do you feel that there is a difference in the hate you felt in comparison to a straight person of color?
Yes. What's interesting within kind of like Black Lives Matter is that some people think that only heterosexual Black Lives Matter. And it's interesting because amongst kind of like the creators of BLM, two are queer, and which is all. It's so important, and I say it all the time that all Black lives matter, and we have seen, or at least I have seen, kind of like an outpouring amongst people sharing that hashtag, that sometimes people don't understand the damage that they can do by purposely excluding queer people from BLM. And I think because of this is such like a strange time, but some people are realizing that I've excluded some people from this conversation. And what can I do moving forward to include them? And so COVID has really created a lot of important conversations that need to be had, um, so that we can create greater visibility across various communities. And I love that. But um, through my work, I I try to um, discuss queerness. Like one of the things that I definitely want to talk about within Death Sentence is the Black queer experience within Black Lives Matter, um, because sometimes that gets lost. And so even outside of this project, if I can write about the straightest of topics, and I throw in something glittery and sparkly, um, just so that people can know that there are Black queer people and we exist.
Um, Tommy Lee asks, "Was it draining to write your piece? And is your soul okay?" LOL.
Um, was it draining? No, it wasn't draining. It felt like a release. Sometimes there are words that are stuck in my head, and I'm trying to figure out what they mean, what can I do with them, and with this project, it just came out of me. There's a woman, I forget her name, but she had a TED talk about creativity, and she said that for her, um, she had a farm, and words would come to her like a tornado of sorts, and she would have to run like hell to her house in order to write the words down. And if she didn't, the tornado would hit someone else. And so I'm the same way. Like I carry a journal with me everywhere I go, and once I get inspiration, I have to write it down. And so it was this kind of like release of words that have been stuck in my head for a long time, and I didn't know what to do with them. And finally, I had a place for them. And it's kind of like this weird experience writing, because like when I write something, it's as if I'm pregnant, and then when it's released to the world, I'm unpregnant, and I'm able to talk to other people about it, and they can tell me how cute my baby is or how cute it isn't. And so in terms of like my soul is full because um, there's this new creation in the world, and other people can talk about it. And the cool thing is that like it might be someone in Iceland who saw this, and they can talk about it to one of their friends. I will never meet them, um, but it's a beautiful idea that art doesn't just exist where I live, it exists everywhere, and people can consume it and people can watch it, and it's a beautiful thing.
Mhm. Thank you, Tommy. I'm glad that you answered the soul part of the question. Because I was going to hold you to that. I was going to be a tough moderator. Um, and Tommy says, "Smiles, I love you. That for you. I love that for you." Joanna also asks, even though social media brought light to the Black Lives Matter movement, do you feel like people who have never experienced any injustices are following along uh, to due to the hype instead of being there for the cause?
Um, That's a difficult question to answer. I think that if we're talking about social media, if someone shares about the death of someone who has died to police brutality, it creates more conversation. But if we're talking about someone who's trying to create um, a social media post that gets a lot of likes, that's very different. And so the strange thing about social media is that cameras are everywhere, and people have, um, I guess, exposed is the word that people are using now. They have exposed people who have done things for personal gain. And so, are there people that are trying to get a bigger following because of Black Lives Matter? They exist. But I think the most important thing is for people who have platforms, and we all have platforms if we are on social media, to really create conversations about violence against Black people, against violence that happens to anyone, and to talk about ways to create change. And the most important way now to create change is to vote. Everyone who is watching this, please vote, because um, there is so much to be lost if we do not go out and vote. And so please vote and vote early if you can.
This is not from the chat, but it's a personal question. Watching some of your YouTube videos in prep for this, and thinking about art as a form of activism, thinking about art as a way to, as you talk about, bring attention to violence. And I want to ask you about the place of thirst traps in that. Can I ask you that? Because I feel like it is part of it, right? Like, you talk about a platform, and there is a balance that I think needs to happen.
There is.
Within any conversation, right?
I would say that the best thirst traps that I've seen on Instagram are individuals who use a thirst trap to get people to act in a certain way. And so if someone is using their body to get people to vote, that is incredible. If someone is using something that's very seductive, to get them to react in a certain way, that is powerful, because you've caught someone's attention, and when they read the description, it tells them, oh, voting in California starts on this date. I didn't know that. But because I read the description, I am informed and I can now vote early. And so there is a place for thirst traps. And if used wisely, they can create movements and mobilize people. So they're very important.
Thank you for letting me be silly with that for a second. But I do appreciate the way that, even in some of the videos that you've created, your using sort of let's call them eye-catching visuals to draw people's attention to representation, to draw people's attention to things that have a deeper meaning. Tommy Lee asks, do you listen to the 1619 podcast by any chance?
I do not listen to the podcast, but I have read the magazine, and it is just an incredible project. That some of the things that the original writer talks about, I did not know. And so I will actually check out the podcast. But for those of you who haven't, and the magazine is actually available online, because the print edition sold out. And so if you are able, if you don't know about it, if you're able to read it, and if you have time, do it, because it's an incredible project that um, talks about slavery in a very in a it gives us the first date of slavery in the states, and it highlights things that I did not know, and so it is an important project that everyone should read, and I will actually check out the podcast.
Cool. Thank you, Tommy. Um, yeah, if there are any more questions, keep them coming. This is probably last call for questions from viewers, I'm imagining. Um, I do have, there was a line that kind of inspired me to ask something, and I think as we're talking about, um, as we're sort of starting to wrap up and thinking about art as a way of speaking to issues and that balancing act. Um, One of the lines in Death Sentence is, "I'm not young anymore, and I haven't had anything to smile about in months." And so I'm curious, as I'm thinking about that line now, I'm thinking about the way that our discourse has changed since George Floyd's murder.
Yeah.
And, we're in election season now.
Yeah.
So the camera has sort of panned on. And I'm curious, um, coming out with the piece in this moment obviously is different from coming out with it in June. And I'm curious what that feels like for you. Does it feel like people are still does it feel like people have sort of moved on in that way, certainly white people? Or does it seem like it's something that is an awakening that's continued?
Because of social media, um, the names of people most visible in Black Lives Matter will never go away. And that's the beautiful thing about social media, is that people will reshare and remind people about things that they think is important. And so it will never go away. Um, and also has like there are conversations online about because we've moved further away from the the cases that, and especially kind of like in this political season, that so much is happening that we're forgetting about their lives and their deaths, and are less people talking about it in this moment because of the election, yes, but because of death sentence, because of other artists who are out there who are constantly reminding people about the deaths of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and about countless other individuals who aren't in kind of like um, they're not as known in the world, that their deaths aren't their deaths will not be forgotten, that people will always talk about them. And it is important to talk about police violence. It is important to talk about violence against Black bodies, but violence against other people as well. um, MLK has this famous quote that an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere, and I truly believe that. Um, and as long as we keep talking, and as long as we have conversations, especially on the kind of like local political level, we can help issue in change.
Thank you for that. We have some. I want to say this person's name maybe is a shortening of Death Aquatic, who just is sending you lots of love.
Oh, Day the Cutie 3000.
3000. That's it. Oh, AQT. Gotcha. Okay, and then we have Jerome Jacobs from South Africa,
Oh wow.
who has a question. They say homophobia is a colonial mindset and is very oppressive. How do you deal with Black homophobia and Black church homophobia?
Wow. Black homophobia. Um, because I have a YouTube channel, I get a lot of homophobic comments. And like I actually received one right before I walked into the door. And I will always respond, Happy Pride, sis, and like rainbow flag, rainbow flag, rainbow flag, rainbow flag. Or it's something positive. Because it's always kind of like a person who doesn't have a picture of their face, and it's like a weird graphic, and so um, these people don't know me. Um, they just see a pride video and decide to leave a hateful comment. Um, but I, when you come out to yourself, that is a powerful moment. And as you're more comfortable coming out to other people, there's this transformation. Um, and as a queer person, you learn to get thick skin because there will be people that you encounter that will try to make you feel less than. And so luckily, I read Black queer literature very young, like Elin Harris, James Earl Hardy. They changed my life. I met Elin Harris when I was really young at a book signing that I asked my mom to go to. That she was like, "Why do you want to go see this gay man?" And I was like, "Oh, because I like his writing." And so they really changed me. And I would say that you have to have a tribe. In my tribe, they were writers, and um, get add as many people to your tribe. Stacey Ann Chin is one of my all-time favorite writers. She is my literary mentor in my head. And so just pull in as many people as you can into your tribe, and what other people think about you will not matter because you will know yourself. And for church homophobia, I don't attend church. And so I don't have to deal with it, but I know it exists. Um, I'm not a person that goes to churches, but I consider myself a religious person. I love cathedrals. And so I was in Montreal in January, and I ran around the city going to different cathedrals. Um, just I love like pageantry and opulence and just the grandeur of it all. And so I would say for people who actively attend church and they have to sit and listen to like sermons um, that are homophobic, to maybe consider going to a more affirming church. And if you can't because you're with your family, um, there are countless amounts of queer people in churches. You can find your tribe there. And after church, you can discuss and talk about, well, what does this mean for me as a queer person who is a Christian, who does go to church? And so finding your tribe will save you.
Mhm. I'm curious, following up on that, we're starting to get into this territory already of sort of what advice would you give to um, to your younger self, to folks who are sort of following in this same path. I love this idea of find your tribe. I'm curious if there are any other sort of tenets or things where you're like, this step in the ladder isn't here, and to get here more quickly or to get here at all, we need to build this step.
Advice for younger people. Um, I would say one, finding your tribe. It's really good to talk about your feelings with someone else. I work in education, and oftentimes for queer students, they think they're the only one that exists. And I was happy at a former job that the students started kind of like a gay straight alliance. But they excluded the straight people. They were like, actually, we don't want you here. Um, and so, really find your tribe. And if you think you're the only one, you can join different groups online. Because of COVID, they're more virtual spaces. And so I would say find a safe virtual space for you, so that you can really talk to other people in your tribe. So that's important. Also, um, really learning queer history. That's really important. Like, you have to learn about the people that came before you, to figure out where you're going to go. So that's extremely important. Like, so read as many queer history books as you can. If you can't read any books, like read some really cool queer documentaries. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime Video. You will find a lot of queer documentaries. And also, just not don't make yourself invisible. A lot of my queer students, they would do everything in their power to not be seen. You're only hurting yourself, because you could be missing out on great friendships, relationships, because you're trying to hide. Um, it's okay to be you. And especially for my students who are, my male students who are feminine, and my female students who were more butch, and my non-binary students who just expressed everything, and my trans students who were early in their transition. And so, no matter what you identify as, no matter who you love, don't be afraid to be visible, um, because your visibility could really help someone else who's trying to figure out what they're trying to do and who they are. And it was important for me to be the advisor of the Gay Straight Alliance, because the students were able to know that there was a queer um, staff member on campus. And so visibility is important. And the beautiful thing about the queer community is that it's extremely diverse. And so, you know, there are so many different types of like queer groups online, that it can blow your mind. So, um, just figure out where you are and explore, and you will have a significantly better life.
Hmm. Thank you for that. Are there any particular spaces you want to shout out that you've found or that have been helpful for you in that journey?
For me as a writer, I love queer writing groups. And one of my favorite poets, but I always butcher her name, Raya. Do you know Raya?
RYA.
RYA, I think that's her name,
Mm-hmm.
Raya. She has a queer writing group at Beyond Baroque. I'm not sure if it's still going on because of COVID, but finding queer writing groups. The LA LGBT Center has some type of like writing groups. But for me, it was writing groups that helped save me. But in kind of like COVID, the LA LGBT Center, they do have virtual groups, and you can find them on their website. Definitely, for Black LGBT youth, in the meantime, is an incredible Black LGBT organization, and they have groups. They have virtual groups every Tuesday. So definitely check them out. Um, but there countless virtual meetups that are happening because of COVID. If you are someone who's into drag, there are tons of like drag virtual groups that are having like virtual drag shows. So there's something for everyone.
Cool. Well, I think we're about to be at time, but I want to close off thanking everybody who's watching, and I'd love to just close off asking you what's bringing you joy lately. I feel like I always think about joy as an act of resistance, and so I think ending on that note is fitting.
Books bring me joy. I can't pass by a magazine on the street without taking it. So like the touch and feel of paper brings me joy. Connecting with people brings me joy. Um, and learning about new writers brings me joy, and interacting with writers brings me joy. So yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for everyone sharing your time with us. Thank you, Victor. The poem is Death Sentence. It's up both at WeHo Arts on the City of West Hollywood's website, and will be up on this channel too, right?
Yes.
So make sure that you check that out there. It's an incredible piece, and thank you so much for this conversation.
Yes, and thank you all. We had some technical difficulties at the beginning, but thank you for coming to this new live. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful day